This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Not-for-profit volunteer organization founded in 1990 for the purpose of promoting human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of a vegetarian education. We're among the largest vegetarian societies in North America, although we're not actually in North America, with over 2,000 members. I'd like to invite those who are not already members to join our organization. Members receive an informative newsletter quarterly and discounts at vegetarian-friendly restaurants around town, such as Huckleberry Farms and Down to Earth. That benefit alone can more than cover the cost of your membership. You'll also be supporting events like tonight's and helping to promote a more healthful and compassionate lifestyle on Oahu and around our islands. Tonight's lecture will be videotaped for broadcast on the BSH weekly TV series called Vegetarian. On Oahu, the program airs on Thursdays at 6 on Olelo 52. We suggest that you tape each show, keep the ones you like or want to share with others, and tape over the others. It's now time for our special guest. We're delighted to welcome to Hawaii Dr. Steve Boyan. Dr. Boyan received his A.B. degree from Brown University and his Ph.D. from the University of Chicago. As a professor of political science at the University of Maryland, he taught courses on the environment and public policy. He also co-authored Ecology and the Politics of Scarcity Revisited. Today he is retired and on the executive committee of the Vermont Sierra Club, and he represents Vermont on the National Council of Club Leaders. Dr. Boyan's presentation tonight is entitled, How Our Food Choices Can Help Save the Environment. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Boyan.
Thank you. Oh, look. Oh. Ooh. Thank you.
Well, hello, and I'm very happy to be here. In September, I attended a meeting of the Council of Club Leaders of the Sierra Club, representing Vermont. We meet with the board of directors who formulate club environmental policies. And the Sierra Club does some good stuff. Its top 3 priorities are to combat global warming, to protect wild places, and to create and foster healthy communities. At the meeting, the board of directors got a report, a year in the making, on smart energy solutions to combat global climate change. Global climate change is the most serious environmental problem that we humans face today. And unless we curb our greenhouse emissions, and curb them dramatically, we will have more Katrinas, more now fertile ecosystems will become barren deserts, heavily populated land on islands or along coasts will be flooded. Even these beautiful islands of Hawaii will be affected. Sea levels here are likely to rise 17 inches to 25 inches by 2100. There'll be toxic blooms and red tides, and you'll have more disease-carrying insects. I'm going to talk about global warming later. Supporting the diet of the average meat eater requires 4,200 gallons of water per day, which includes the share used for the animals' drinking water, irrigation of crops, processing, washing, cooking, and so forth. Supporting the diet of an average vegan requires only 300 gallons a day. One way of looking at this is the way John Robbins did, noting that you can save more water by not eating a pound of beef than you would by not showering for an entire year. Another way to look at it is to do the math. All other things being equal, a meat eater uses 14 times the water per day as a vegan. You might say, well, so what? There's still plenty of fresh water. True, but millions of other plants and animals on the planet, many of which we depend on for the foods we eat and the air we breathe, need that fresh water. Take the lowly freshwater bivalves, for example. There are 19 taxa presumed extinct, 44 species listed or proposed as federally endangered, and there's another 69 species that may be endangered. Their inability to get clean water is why they and other species are being wiped out. In addition to the lack of clean water, the clean water that is available is not equally distributed. Already, a quarter of the world's human population does not have access to safe drinking water. Because of this scarcity, agriculture and growing numbers of people compete for it. Water tables are falling in many parts of the world. In 1/5 of the irrigated area of the United States and large parts of China and India, farmers are pumping out water faster than it is being recharged, a process that cannot continue indefinitely. We are depleting our largest underground aquifer, the Ogallala, by 13 trillion gallons per year. In West Texas, the aquifer has already dried up. They can't get any more water for their wells. In parts of Africa, the Middle East, China, and the western United States, getting usable water has become a serious problem. The United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development says that the increasing meat consumption of the developing countries will require 1,500 cubic kilometers of additional water. I tried to translate this into our measurements, gallons, and the way I did it, it comes out to 400 trillion gallons of additional clean water. Now, where's that coming from? Moreover, global warming may make the problem of finding adequate water worse. It's predicted to shift where the rains fall. That would mean that all the water management projects, dams, flood control, hydropower, reservoirs, built where water is now available, will become less productive or even useless when rainfall and snowpack have shifted elsewhere. We'll have to build new projects wherever the rains come at enormous cost. Anders Berntel of the Stockholm International Water Institute predicted this summer that it's going to be almost impossible to feed future generations the kind of diet that we have now in Western Europe and North America. That may be appropriate music for this, what I'm talking about. The other side of the water supply problem is the water pollution problem. The peasant with the dozen chickens did not have a water pollution problem. The chicken's excrement was absorbed by the plants on his own farm and may have even helped his vegetables to grow. But the water from a CAFO not only includes manure, but such things as salts, pesticides, and assorted microorganisms. This waste overwhelms the absorptive capacity of the planet. Factory farms have produced 27,000 miles of rivers in the United States, more than all other industrial sources combined. They have polluted the groundwater in dozens of states. Animal manure is threatening the drinking water of 65% of Californians. Now, this is just from the normal operations of factory farms. When accidents happen, it's worse. In North Carolina's New River, the wall of an open cesspool or lagoon gave way in June 1995, dumping 25 million gallons of putrefying urine and feces into that river. 10 to 14 million fish were killed, and 364,000 acres of coastal shellfishing beds were closed. I've kayaked parts of the New River. I'm glad I wasn't there at that time. Maryland's Chesapeake Bay, where I spent my working years, is polluted more by the factory farms on the eastern shore of the bay than by the urban population on its western shore. The 600 million chickens over there produce more waste than a city of 4 million people. They put 3 times as much phosphorus into the Chesapeake Bay as do municipal sewage treatment plants. 1/3 of the wells on Maryland's and Delaware's eastern shore violate the EPA's drinking water standards. We've had several outbreaks of Pfiesteria, a toxic algae that kills fish and sickens people during the years that I lived there. Nationwide, CAFOs produce 130 times the amount of waste that people do. You ask, why don't they clean it up, for heaven's sakes? Well, the current administration in Washington is not likely to make them do so, first of all. But even if it did, the task is formidable. CAFOs produce 600 million tons of waste yearly. You can build cesspools or lagoons to contain it, but you're soon going to overwhelm those lagoons. Picture this. 2 cattle feedlots outside Greeley, Colorado, at full capacity, produce more excrement than Atlanta, Boston, Denver, and St. Louis combined. Now, what kind of lagoon can hold that? So you can spread some waste on nearby farms. But how do you find enough acreage to spread 600 million tons of manure? A 20,000 animal CAFO requires 74,000 spreadable acres of farmland. CAFO managers have a problem. In practice, the CAFOs spread more waste than the limited amount of land around them can absorb. And because their waste is continuous, they spread a lot of it at the wrong time of the year when the crops can't take up the nutrients. The bottom line is that the majority of the animal waste ends up polluting nearby soil, flowing into streams and rivers, and ultimately the bays and oceans. 8,000 square miles of the Gulf of Mexico is a dead zone where every oxygen-dependent aquatic species dies. Now, CAFOs are both a result and a cause of the uncoupling of the relationship between livestock and crops.
What's CAFO?
Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. Factory farm. Except for young cattle, the animals do not get their feed naturally by grazing and foraging. They get fed in the CAFOs. Then most crops are not usually fed by the animals' manure or compost. Instead, farmers buy petroleum-based fertilizer. Their crops are grown using other petroleum-based chemicals like herbicides and pesticides. The production of pesticides and chemical fertilizers burns lots of fuel. Then fuel is used to get the feed to the animals. Fuel is used in the CAFO's operations. It's used again to get the animals to slaughterhouses and again to markets. Fuel is used to refrigerate the meat, often for thousands of miles, and again in the stores where it's sold. Fuel is again used by you, well, not you, but others to cook it. Well, maybe some of you. I don't know. In the end, 1/3 of the fossil fuel used in the United States is used for animal production. According to David Pimentel, it takes an average of 28 calories of fossil fuel to produce 1 calorie of meat protein for human consumption. It takes only 3.3 calories of fossil fuel to produce 1 calorie of protein from grain. Put another way, a meat eater consumes 8.5 times the energy of a vegan to get 1 calorie of protein. As we shall see, he is responsible for even more than 8.5 times the global warming than a vegan in getting his 1 calorie of protein. Today's factory-raised cow is not a solar-powered ruminant, but another fossil fuel machine. But this fossil fuel subsidy for modern agriculture cannot go on indefinitely. As the human population increases, we added 300 million people just last year, equivalent to the total population of the United States. And as more people attempt to get more meat and other material goods, we will reach the limit of available oil per person. Just as grain output per person overall has declined since 1984, oil output per person will decline. Oil prices, meat prices, and the prices of almost everything else in this global economy will rise. If the decline in oil production is precipitous, in other words, if there are marked discrepancies between the supply and demand for oil, market price mechanisms will collapse or degenerate into uncontrolled inflation. In a famine, supply and demand are eventually brought into balance by death or emigration, not by the price mechanism. By mid-century, we're not talking of a long time from now, by mid-century we could have 10 billion people, but enough oil for only 3 or 5 billion people. If alternative energy sources have not been developed to replace that gap, it will cause multiple problems for our species. We will compete for dwindling energy supplies with wars, famines, and loss of life for many people. Losses of life are already occurring for many other plants and animals on the planet. We are causing 50,000 species of plants and animals to become extinct each year. That's not 50,000 plants and animals, which would be bad enough. It's 50,000 species. It's the worst period of species extinction in 60 million years. Why? Well, because we're destroying wildlife habitat. And one big reason that we do that is to grow grass for cattle. A 1997 study of endangered species in the southwestern United States found that cattle ranching threatened half the species studied. But it's in the tropics that we're really doing a job. We're destroying 150 acres of rainforest per minute. Let me say that again. 150 acres of rainforest per minute. That's 78 million acres per year for both timber and to grow beef for export to the United States. Now that fact is not of just aesthetic interest. Tropical forests sustainably support people and millions of plants and animals. They provide fruits, vegetables, spices, nuts, medicines, timber, oils, waxes, and rubber consumed by people and industry. Wild plants often interbreed with humanity's cultivated crops, making the crops stronger or more resistant to disease. They moderate temperatures, regulate stream flows and groundwater levels, recycle soil nutrients, and cleanse pollutants from surface water. Wild plants degrade waste and control floods. 1/4 of our medicines come from compounds found in plants. Wild species are the original source of many of the chemicals used in prescription drugs. We found Taxol, for example, in the bark of the Pacific yew. We use it to treat ovarian cancer, metastatic breast and lung cancer, and Kaposi sarcoma, which is a cancer that people with AIDS get. We discovered the drug in an old-growth forest in Washington state that had been preserved in part to protect the habitat of the spotted owl. Only 10% of our Pacific old-growth forests remain. Suppose we had wiped them out. 5/6 of the estimated number of plant species in the world are still unknown and unclassified by the world's biologists. We are wiping out 137 species, that's species of plants and animals per day. It's entirely likely that in some of the perhaps 1 million species of life we have already wiped out in the tropics, we would have found chemical compounds that would have provided cures for some of the diseases we humans get. Now, no one will ever know. Ironically, the organization Raintree Nutrition claims that if the medicinal plants, fruits, nuts, oils, and other resources like rubber, chocolate, and chicle were harvested sustainably, rainforest land has much more economic value than if timber were harvested or if it were burned down for cattle or farming operations. I have the figures. $60 an acre for cattle, $150 an acre for timber, $2,400 per acre for sustainable wild harvest. Now we're also wiping out trees, the lungs of the planet. Not only are they a major consumer of the carbon dioxide we produce, they are the main source for the oxygen we breathe. Deforestation is the second largest human source of atmospheric carbon dioxide, right behind the burning of fossil fuels. You get more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere each year by tropical deforestation than by all the burning of fossil fuels in the United States. Yet all of this destruction is occurring for what seems to be more important as a human priority: to have timber and cattle. You know, it was on the day I wrote this passage that I had an appointment to see my urologist. And he told me a story that I'm going to share with you about how much people want their beef. I had been diagnosed with prostate cancer in 1998. And unfortunately, they didn't get it all. And I had a rising PSA, and they were going to put me on hormones. And instead I decided I had read enough to try something else, and it was to go on a low-fat vegan diet with a lot of soy and a lot of green tea and some things I won't trouble you with. And I drove my PSA levels down to 0. And they stayed there for 3 years. And then since that time, they've been bouncing around at a very low level. The last reading was 0.5, which is not anything to get very worried about. And my urologist happens to be the department chair of the urology department at the University of Vermont Medical School. And when he has cancer patients who are in my situation, he always tells them, why don't you call up Boyan? He can give you some advice on what you can do with your diet. That may help. Otherwise, I got to put you on hormones. And hormones are unpleasant. And they cause breast enlargements, and they cause all kinds of other problems that are very nasty. You lose your libido and you know, other things like that I won't go into. And he says, amazingly, The majority of the people he talks to say, nah, give me the hormone, give me the shot, doc. I don't want to I can't give up my meat. You know, we're talking about their life here. But they say no, they won't give up their meat. It is a very important human priority, apparently. And that story, you know, just at the time I was writing this passage, just sort of drove it home. And some people do call me up. I do give them some advice. And some people do change. I don't want to suggest that not, you know, all of them don't. But he says the majority of them don't. They don't want to pursue it. Give me Lupron. Well, all right. Cattle need to graze for part of their lives. Maybe you would think that since this is so, that we have at least preserved our grasslands. And if you thought that, you'd be wrong. Richard Manning has written that grassland covers more land area than any other ecosystem in North America, and no other ecosystem has suffered such a massive loss of life. What was once a diverse variety of grasses when the buffalo and the antelope roamed are now monocultures of just a few species. Cattle destroy grasses. They trample plants. Their dung provides little fertilization because it's wet and it loses much of its nitrogen in the form of ammonia to the atmosphere. Cattle also compact the soil. When it rains, the land doesn't absorb the rainwater. It runs off, taking away topsoil, forming deep gullies and damaging stream beds. Plants and wildlife struggle to come back in those kinds of conditions. Furthermore, whatever wildlife does survive in this degraded environment has to face the United States government. The government poisons, traps, snares, dens, shoots, and guns down whatever wildlife it thinks might threaten the cattle. You all know what denning is? No. I didn't either. But that's when the government agents pour kerosene into the dens of animals and sets them on fire, burning the pups alive in their nests. That's called denning. And the government dens badgers, coyotes, fox, raccoons, skunks, beavers, porcupines, and prairie dogs. Even bears and mountain lions are denned. Some species of prairie dogs are now threatened. We have killed 98% of the black-tailed and Utah prairie dogs. Of course, we wiped out the wolf completely on our cattle lands. We kill about 100,000 coyotes, bobcats, mountain lions, feral hogs, and bison each year to prevent predation, grazing competition, and the spread of disease. As they say, your taxes are at work. Well, modern animal agriculture may be destroying forests and grasslands and the wild plants and animals with them. But factory farms do support some kinds of wildlife. You know what those are? There's a few kinds of things. The bugs that cause dysentery, chlorea, trichinosis, salmonella, listeria, E. coli, and I can't even say it, Campylobacter. How do you say it? Campylobacter. Now those species do just fine. CAFOs have crowded, inhumane, and unhygienic conditions, perfect for these bugs. The bugs can spread to humans. Campylobacter is found in chickens, listeria in soft cheese and meat paste, E. coli in any food that has contact with fecal matter, and salmonella in raw or undercooked eggs. Do you remember the E. coli in spinach last September? The spinach that sickened and killed some people? Well, investigators found that the E. coli in that spinach had the same DNA signature as that found in fecal matter on a ranch growing both greens and beef cattle. That E. coli outbreak was the result of contamination from cattle. Now, I'm not here to talk about the health effects of eating factory farm meat. Dr. Michael Greger, who is coming here next month, can talk to you about this topic with a lot more authority than I can. My point is only to note that CAFOs do not harm all aspects of the environment. The environment is indifferent. We humans are able to understand that the CAFOs we have created destroy wild forests, the diversity of life in the grasslands, consume vast amounts of fossil fuel energy, exhaust fresh water supplies, and overwhelm the plant's capacity to absorb their waste. We humans judge that to be bad and say that CAFOs harm the environment. But CAFOs also have created an ideal environment for some species we humans don't like and we call pathogens. Such is the case with the avian influenza virus. This is a virus that has existed in ducks for thousands of years without harming the ducks. But because of our animal agriculture, the virus has mutated to a form that kills the animals themselves and can jump the species barrier. It can infect and kill humans. And CAFOs, again, are an ideal environment for further mutations, one of which may allow the virus to spread from human to human, and which may kill millions of us. It's a frightening prospect and doubly tragic because this would be a virus of our own making. Dr. Geiger will talk to you about that next month. He's written a book that he's just published on the subject. I'm going to talk finally about global climate change or global warming, which is another problem of our own making. I don't like the term global warming. Back in Vermont, every winter people say, I want global warming. They're under the illusion that the only effect of what we call global warming is warming. I wish it were so, but it's not. Global climate change or destabilization is a consequence of our breaking the carbon cycle. Nature does not produce pollution. Plants grow, taking up carbon dioxide from the air and nitrates from the soil. They excrete oxygen into the air. Animals eat the plants, excreting carbon dioxide to the air and organic compounds that the plants use as fertilizer. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are in balance, and the cycle repeats over and over again. We humans produce pollution. We produce chemicals and products that are not found in nature and cannot be eaten by living things, or we produce them in such great quantity as to overwhelm nature's ability to use them. Our burning of fossil fuels overwhelms nature's ability to use the carbon locked up in these ancient plants. Carbon dioxide traps the heat absorbed by the Earth from the sun and prevents its escape back into space. Carbon dioxide levels at 36% higher than pre-industrial levels going back over 160,000 years. You probably saw that movie, Inconvenient Truth. You saw that? And where Al Gore, at the end of it, he climbed a ladder to show what's happened all of a sudden with the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as compared to all the last 160,000 years. And in the past, whenever carbon dioxide levels have risen, global temperatures have risen. It hasn't happened so much yet here. And that's partly because the pollution we produce is filtering the amount of sun coming and the heat from the sun coming in. So there's a little bit of a balance there. But as we get rid of the pollution, there'll be more global temperature rise. I mean, everything's in balance in its own peculiar ways. Well, there's another problem. The atmospheric concentration of methane, a molecule of which traps 20 to 30 times the heat of a carbon dioxide molecule, is double pre-industrial levels. The consequences could be dire. On October 30th, just a few weeks ago, the British government issued a report by Sir Nicholas Stern, who was the Chief of Government Economic Service and a former chief economist of the World Bank. And it predicted apocalyptic effects from climate change, including droughts, flooding, famine, skyrocketing malaria rates, and the extinction of many animal species during the current generation if changes are not made soon. Many cities could be at risk of flooding from coastal surges, including New York, Miami, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Buenos Aires. It said the costs related to climate change, if it is allowed to continue unmitigated, could devour as much as 20% of the world's gross domestic product. 20% is huge if it were that much. It could be as low as 5%. It could be as high as 20%. If it's 20%, it's huge. Forget the idea that your kids will be better off than you. It just isn't going to happen. Moreover, I would add just one other consequence of global warming that the Stern report didn't consider. The likelihood, if greenhouse emissions continue on their present course, that the Gulf Stream may stop. If the Gulf Stream stops, that will cause Northern Europe, Canada, and the northeastern United States to become virtually unlivable, while making the tropics still hotter. I don't even know what the economic consequences of that would be. Imagine all of that northern hemisphere being unlivable. Now, what has all that got to do with factory farming? Answer, everything. I've already noted that 1/3 of the fossil fuel used in the United States is used for animal production. All those fossil fuels, when burned, emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. I have also noted that deforestation is the second largest source of atmospheric carbon dioxide, and that one of the main reasons we have deforestation is to grow grass for cattle. But livestock also emits 60% of the world's methane, and methane traps 20 to 30 times more heat than the same amount of carbon dioxide. As a result, you can fight global warming with your knife and fork. That's a quote from Elisa Hammond. Geophysicists Gideon Eshel and Pamela Martin of the University of Chicago have done the calculations that show that Hammond is right. They looked at a typical carnivorous diet from production through consumption and calculated that a typical carnivore emits the equivalent of 1.5 tons more carbon dioxide per year than a vegan does. That's more of a carbon saving than if you drive a Prius rather than a Camry. Doing that saves only 1 ton of carbon dioxide a year. That doesn't mean don't buy a Prius. It's still a ton is still a lot of carbon saving. And after you drive it about 21,000 miles, it's a lot of money saving too. I have one, and I'm saving money right now. But Eshel and Martin's calculations do show that if people do adopt a vegan diet, it will have a larger impact on global climate change than what is usually prescribed as having the most impact, driving a fuel-efficient car. And their conclusion may be an understatement. This is because while humans have produced far more carbon dioxide than other greenhouse gases combined, carbon dioxide is not responsible for most of the Earth's warming. The other greenhouse gases have more impact. Nitrous oxide, for example, traps 310 times more heat than does the same amount of carbon dioxide. Now I'm going to give you 3 guesses. What do you think is the greatest source of nitrous oxide in the United States? Not exactly. 73% of U.S. emissions of nitrous oxide come from animal grazing, manure management, and crop growing practices. Now, I don't want to pile it on, but for the environment, animal agriculture really stinks. Well, let's go back to methane. It's responsible for nearly half of the Earth's human-induced warming. Animal agriculture is responsible for 1/3 of the methane emissions from human activity, the largest single source. We can eliminate that by simply going vegan. Since most farm animals are allowed to live only 1 or 2 years, it would have an immediate impact. Animal production would drop immediately, or quickly, and methane cycles out of the atmosphere in just 8 years. It takes 100 years for carbon dioxide to cycle out of the atmosphere. To stop global climate change, nothing would be quicker than to just stop eating meat. Unfortunately, we all know in this room it's not going to happen. No matter how strong a case, no matter how overwhelming the argument, people are not going to do it. Most people simply do not realize that they are part of a delicate web of life that their own actions are destroying. They do not have either the psychological readiness or the political will to adopt the changes that will be necessary. You remember the anecdote of my urologist. Recall such things as last year or 2 years ago when we had the battles over even minor revisions of the food pyramid to take account of the harmful health effects of excessive meat consumption and the political resistance that encountered. So sometimes I'm just a pessimist. But someday the earth will just force the changes on us. People will make them, like them or not, to reduce the suffering that we'll have if we just continue on our present course. At other times I think, no, we should not give up and let nature take its course. We do see some mass awareness these days of global climate change. We do hear some talk of doing something about it in some countries. In some countries, we even see some significant action. In Germany, they've reduced their carbon emissions by 20%. Other northern European countries are also stabilizing and reducing their carbon emissions. People are even making some dietary changes. In Britain, organic food is widely available. Some food chains carry only organic foods if an organic variety is available. Most British restaurants today are vegetarian friendly. Somebody must be eating these foods. I want to conclude with another anecdote. When my proposal at the Sierra Club meeting got no response, I wanted to find out why. I asked people, would you support a resolution to urge people to eat lower on the food chain? And the answers I got from my admittedly unscientific sample were universally no. I can't give up meat, I was told. Or ice cream. Never would I give up ice cream. Or I got, the Sierra Club shouldn't be preaching. Or I even got, you're right. But there's other things we should do before we give up meat. Okay. So I decided I better try a different question. I asked them, would you give up meat 1 day a week to help reduce its environmental impact? Everybody, including some of the people in that first sample, said, yeah, I'd do that. I think we have an opening here. Environmentalists know that there's a problem with their eating meat. They just don't want to face up to it. But we vegetarians can approach them with a message. Perhaps to go meatless 1 day a week. It would be a message pitched specifically to them with the sort of arguments I've made here today. We can join environmental organizations and make the arguments from inside. We can go to these energy conferences that they have in my state, and I'm sure they have in your state and elsewhere, where you go and you hear the 10 things you can do to help save the earth. Twice in the past year I've gone to these conferences, and I've added, because it's never on the list, eating lower on the food chain. But I now think if I had said, make one day a week vegetarian, people might have been more receptive. At least it might have become the 11th thing you could do to save the earth. The article in the Sierra Club magazine this month that recommends 10 ways to eat well has one to, quote, eschew meat-centered meals. I was thinking of that as a slogan. It's kind of cute, the word eschew, but I wondered if some people wouldn't know what eschew means. An alternative would be to support Farm's campaign. You know, Farm. There's a vegetarian organization called Farm, and we could have a slogan say, "Fight climate change. Don't eat meat on Mondays," or something else. You know, brainstorm something better than that. Whatever we would come up with. The point is we have a case that we can make to environmentalists. We probably shouldn't demand an all-or-nothing approach, because then they'll say nothing. But just simply brainstorm something that they can buy into, and then go into it. Just go with it. To save this planet, this beautiful planet, this tiny speck in this universe that's our only home, we all got to do everything we can. Thank you. Yes?
People wouldn't give up meat or ice cream. Why don't you tell them about making alternatives? There's rice cream, and there's also some food substitutes for meat.
They know about that. They know about that. I tried that, actually. I tried that with one or two of them. They said, nah, it's not as good. Yes?
What worked with you? How did you find out about it, and what made you decide to change?
Well, when I was writing this book, it was the first time I ever thought of it. It never dawned on me vegetarian. I wasn't vegetarian. Some strange creature. It never occurred to me as something that I would be. I remember we were having a house guest once. My wife will tell this story too. We had a house guest come, and he said he was a vegetarian. And so the two of us were in panic. What the hell are we going to serve this person? You know? And what we found out that he eats fish. He's not really a vegetarian, but he said a fish was a moving plant. Okay. So we were okay. We could deal with fish. That was back in the old days. But when I first began to kind of ponder the whole matter is when I was writing my book, and I came upon the data that you could feed 10 people with the amount of grain it takes to feed an animal that would then feed one person. And I thought, oh wow. And that means we could do something about hunger. And I thought, well, that's a good thing. Then I thought, yeah, but if I give up meat, are 10 more people going to live? And I said, nah. And so I forgot about it. But it's in the back of your head. You know, it stays there. It stays in the back of your head. It festered. And gradually I started to learn about some of the health impacts also of vegetarian diet, and so I became initially a vegetarian for, I guess it was 6 or 7 years, and later became a vegan. So I evolved slowly into it.
The prostate cancer didn't make
The prostate cancer switched me from a vegetarian to a vegan.
And have you read some medical literature about that?
Actually, I did. I read a lot. You know, when you get cancer, all of a sudden, life is different. First of all, the abstraction you're going to die someday is not such an abstraction. You begin to think about, oh, wow. And it's scary. And so everything that you ever learned how to research when you were an academic, you now go frantically and read about both in the printed materials and on the internet and everything. And I came actually upon most of it was a lot of junk. Frankly, it was just stuff you couldn't believe. It was health nuts who had theories of this or that I was very dismissive of. But I found something on the University of Toronto Medical School webpage which suggested this low-fat vegan diet as a way to perhaps deal with prostate cancer. Damn if I didn't try it and if it didn't work. And I'm still on it. Although they don't endorse it anymore, or it's not on their website anymore. They probably still endorse it. It's actually much more sophisticated now, what you can do. I do, as I say, I do nutritional counseling for people now who are interested. But I guess that would be irrelevant for you. Yeah.
This isn't a question, this is a comment.
I worked in the environmental movement for 5 years, and never was it an issue. Vegetarianism, veganism. You know, at times we'd see where cattle grazing was causing desertification, and, you know, we try to not have cattle raising in a certain park or something like that, but never did we make the connection of, and please don't eat meat so we don't have this problem of having too many cattle.
Right.
And I'm wondering, you know, so it was an organization that I really believed in, does good work, did good work, never was one of our issues. And why didn't Al Gore's movie mention the impact of...
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? No mention of it.
It's an inconvenient truth.
Good answer.
And he raises Angus beef, I think we pointed that out.
I find that as I talk to my, people who are environmental activists, it is an inconvenient truth. They don't want to deal with it. They know something about it. But sometimes they know more than they admit to knowing. And I know among the Sierra Clubbers, they're getting exposed to it because they are very excited about GMOs, the food issues that are there. And you can't miss it. As you start to read, you can't miss it. And so they're learning about it. And I was pretty amazed to see something in the magazine this month, which actually went into it. And I was amazed 2 or 3 years ago when the Los Angeles chapter actually put out a whole bunch of stuff about eating a plant-centered diet. I didn't say don't eat meat, but make it a plant-centered diet. That's progress. The part of the problem is that there is a fear on the part of the activists that if apart from their own thing, which they don't want to talk about, but if we got to be known as a vegetarian organization, nobody would join us. The Sierra Club is a big organization, lots of members, and it does lots of good things anyway, and they just are afraid that we'll lose our members, can't bring them along. I think it's changing. I think you can bring them along. In fact, I think maybe some of the members are ahead of some of the leaders. Yes? Yeah, the majority of people certainly are not ready, but more and more, I'm a little optimistic that if you approach them with something like I said, would you give up meat one day a week? They might be willing to do that. And I was unaware that this organization called Farm had a Meatless Monday campaign for some years now. which hasn't gotten very far, and there's some schools of public health which have a Meatless Monday campaign, but that's not a very good one, because their definition of a Meatless Monday is a day that you can eat fish. We gotta get that one a little bit straightened out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boyan. We do have our refreshments, I've been told, and because we have a slightly smaller group than usual, we have an abundance of refreshments. So help yourself, and if you're able to carry the little plates, feel free to take some home as well. Thank you for coming. If you're able to help put the chairs up, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344, or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.